The top story in a week filled with lots of top stories was the stunning announcement that Cody and Brandi Rhodes, who have been with AEW since its founding, are gone from All Elite Wrestling. Cody, Brandi, Tony Khan all issued statements on Tuesday morning about the news. Cody said, "I have loved my time in AEW, amazing locker room, amazing fans, amazing people. The revolution was indeed televised, and I've been incredibly lucky to be part of that. First, I want to thank Tony Khan. He's taken the baton and run with it, and it was an honor to work for him and to know him on a personal level. He is a beautiful soul. Obviously, I need to thank my incredible wife and the mother of my baby girl, Brandi, for all of her love and support throughout this journey together and the amazing relationships that she fostered with Culture City and the American Heart Association. I also need to thank Nick and Matt Jackson. These two, whether they know it or not, took an undesired and not confident little cub and gifted me with the confidence to become a leader of the pack. Kenneth Omega," I love the... That's like Ronda Rousey calling Becky Rebecca on TV a few weeks ago. "Kenneth Omega, Chris Jericho, we started the fire. I have so many milestones and beautiful memories of this renaissance through sweat, blood, tears, literal fire, and all of that. I left it all on the mat. Everything pales in comparison to the final contribution I was empowered to lead at the company, the community outreach team. In the most inward moments, your outward behavior and your ability to take fame and influence and do something of value for the communities you visit is the highest honor. I am confident that Amanda Huber will lead the department with style. I'm so proud of my creations and contributions and the items I supported or collaborated on with such wonderful professionals." Tony Khan said Cody and Brandi were integral to the launch of All Elite Wrestling. Cody's ability combined with his boldness and his passion for our industry and his love for community outreach helped AEW deliver on our mission to give fans what they needed for far too long. Something new, innovative, and lasting. And he went on to compliment Brandi as well and said he has immense respect for the both of them. So a couple of very positive statements, and Brandi put one out as well. Again, all very positive. Justin Barrasso of Sports Illustrated says one of the key factors that led to Cody's exit was losing all responsibilities involving booking, which really bothered him. You know, booking was an area that Cody's father excelled at, and it sounds like, to me as I read this, it sounds like maybe he was hoping to carve his own niche out in much the same way that Dusty Rhodes did. But if you remember, it was after that infamous segment on the Final Dynamite back in 2019, where the Dark Order beat down the Elite guys, which everybody panned. I mean, even Jim Ross works for the company, and he called the show, later on he called it the Drizzling Shits, and said that he was embarrassed by it. After that is when Tony Khan took more control. That's when stories came out about Tony Khan consolidating more power and control over creative in the company. Not that people wouldn't have, input, but he kind of saw that, and he saw the fan reaction. And Tony, whatever you want to say about Tony Khan, a lot of times when there is some kind of negative backlash or fan reaction to something that they do, he does read that, he does see that, and he does try to do something about it. And so that is when he started to exert more control over the creative end of that company. Certain top guys do have influence over what they do on TV. Cody was clearly one of those people. I mean, just look at his promos. But evidently, he wasn't satisfied with his lack of power in that area, and that seems to have had as much to do with his decision to leave as the money aspect. Because at the end of the day, I always say this, at the end of the day, it's always about money. You either want more of it, or you find out how much the other guys are making, and you want to be making at least as much as they are, if not more. But money talks. And PW Insider says once they hit a snag in the negotiations over money, that ultimately led to the end of their talks on Valentine's Day. And the reason they were even having negotiations is because Cody and Brandi had 3-year deals that expired at the end of last year. So after Cody lost his TNT Championship to Sammy Guevara in the ladder match on Dynamite, and he said, hand to God, I'm working on a handshake deal with Tony Khan, and I have no actual contract right now with the company, he was telling the truth. Negotiations on a new deal were ongoing at that point, which begs the question why Tony Khan would put one of his championships. I know he was an EVP and all and had a certain amount of trust, I'm sure, but still, he put one of his championships on somebody whose contract was literally expiring days later at the end of December. And that he could have rolled over. He could have rolled over Cody's contract if he wanted to, and he chose not to. That was maybe the most shocking thing to me in reading what Meltzer wrote in The Observer, that Cody had the option in his contract, just like the Young Bucks did. Kenny Omega told Meltzer that he did not, so his contract is going to be up next year, but the others did. The option that Tony Khan could have rolled him over with automatically for another 2 years before it expired, he didn't do it. He did it for the Bucks. He may have also rolled over Hangman Page, who's their world champion, so it makes sense. But he opted not to do the same with Cody and Brandi, which I think is very telling that things were not as rosy as they were painted in those public statements that I just read. Not saying that they were lying, I'm just saying that, you read that and everything seems all hunky-dory and things were not as rosy as they painted it out to be. Tony Khan may have sensed that Cody was very unhappy. Wade Keller of The Torch said that Cody was asking for more money than Khan was willing to spend, which would have to be a big money figure considering that Tony Khan has been on a spending spree. He's bringing in free agents left and right for months, with more to come. He's not done yet. They may not all be making millions, but he signed CM Punk. You know that had to be a big money contract, maybe the biggest money contract in the entire company. He signed Bryan Danielson. He signed Adam Cole. He just signed Keith Lee. All of these signings, to a degree, made Cody more expendable when it came to, time to negotiate. Cody was one of the few known names from WWE when this whole thing first started, Jericho being the biggest. And now the company is filled with former names from WWE. What Cody was asking for depends on what he was already being paid. Only Cody knows that. If he was making $1 million, did he want $2 million a year? $3 million? We don't know. But clearly, whatever it was a big ask. And Tony Khan felt that Cody Rhodes was not worth the price tag that he was asking. It had to be a lot of money for Tony Khan, of all people, to pause and go, it's a little too rich even for me. It had to be a big figure for him to say that. Now, a second season of Rhodes to the Top, which I don't think was ever officially greenlit, but they already had footage filmed for it, that is no more. There will be no more Rhodes to the Top unless it ends up on Peacock. I don't know how any of this might affect his role as a judge on that Go Big show. You could always just replace him on there. This is a big deal. It's not very often that I read a wrestling news story that shocks me. This shocked me. When I read that Cody and Brandi were gone from AEW, whatever you think of Cody Rhodes, him walking away from the company that he helped build, the company that he was such an integral part of helping to grow, the first ever TNT champion and what that title meant to him, the man who sat next to Tony Khan on headset at the gorilla position, his outside projects with Warner Media, and his unhappiness, his deep unhappiness with how he was used at the end of his WWE run. All of those things taken together, and the fact that he was an executive vice president in the company, that he would walk away from all of that and very likely end up back in WWE when he was the EVP out of all of them, who could never keep WWE out of his mouth. Always taking little shots, smashing thrones, pulling out golden shovels on TV. It's like, tell me you want to be Triple H and Stephanie without actually telling me you want to be Triple H and Stephanie. That he would be the first of the EVPs to split and go back is one of the most stunning stories in wrestling in a very long time. For someone who reportedly craved more creative influence to possibly end up back at a place that does not prioritize creative influence to anyone. The way WWE operates and the things that Cody did have the freedom to say and the things he had the freedom to do, when it came to his character and the way he was presented in AEW, those two things, they just, in my brain, they just don't jive together. This is the man who stood in the middle of the ring on Dynamite 3 years ago, before his match against Chris Jericho, and he took a shot at WWE by referring to AEW as Ellis Island, where millions of immigrants arrived with the hope of a better life. He said AEW was Ellis Island for a professional wrestler. This is freedom, he said. Like it's fucking Braveheart. This is freedom. So it seems strange that he would go back to a place that values the opposite. It doesn't seem to make sense. Until you realize two things. First, this is a business. It is a business like any other. And at the end of the day, people want to make money. Now, egos can get involved. And then it's not enough to just make money. Now you want to make more money. You want to make more money than everybody else. I'm not saying that Cody said that to Tony Khan. I'm sensing a common thread in a lot of these reports. I think Cody saw Tony Khan going out and signing all of these big names, bigger than him, and throwing a ton of money at them, and he wanted to be compensated accordingly because he felt like he was worth it as one of the founding fathers of the company. His star was starting to shine brighter. I mean, hell, they put him in the ring with Shaquille O'Neal. Cody put him through a table. He saw how much greener the grass was for some of these other ex-WWE stars, and he wanted to be paid accordingly. But with the crowds turning against him and Brandi and all these other names that Tony Khan brought in, they were no longer the belle of the ball. They were no longer the prom king and queen of AEW. He was still a big name for them, but was he bigger than CM Punk or Bryan Danielson or, Kenny Omega, Jon Moxley? Jericho is debatable because he's fallen down the card himself. The answer is no. He wasn't bigger than those guys. If he was, Tony Khan would have rolled over that option and stopped him from going back to WWE potentially. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is something that Kenny Omega talked about on the Observer website. He was on Observer Radio the other day, did this long interview with Meltzer, and out of all of the EVPs, he said that Cody was the one who always seemed most interested in the war with WWE, quote unquote, the war with WWE, and taking it to WWE, whereas Kenny and the Bucks were not about that. They had a different vision for AEW than the vision that Cody had. And there were some people who thought that he was taking shots at Cody or throwing him under the bus. I didn't see it that way. I thought he was actually being very kind of open and honest, pleasantly so about the whole thing. But still being very respectful of Cody. I didn't get the sense that, he was harboring any ill will or, backing the bus up over him. But he just said, look, it may have been that we just had different visions for what this thing is supposed to be. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. Cody never seemed to fully let WWE go. It's like deep down, he still had unfinished business there. He wasn't satisfied with how things ended. And now he went out, he made himself a bigger star than he was before. And now he's ready to walk back into Vince McMahon's office looking for his approval. Like, see what I did? I can be a top star in your company. Because it does seem very hypocritical after all the shit talking that he has done for him to leave the so-called revolution that he helped start, this revolution that he's always talked about, to go back to, what people in AEW would look at and call the evil empire. It does seem hypocritical. Cody and Brandi's contracts expiring means there would be no non-compete. If AEW talents even have non-competes in their contracts, I'm not sure if they do or not. But that would only apply if they were fired or if they were released early. That did not happen. And so it looks like the destination for Cody is indeed going to be WWE. There's been no pen to paper as of yet. That's the belief. But they have had discussions, and it seems very likely that that is where he is headed, to the point where people in WWE are celebrating that they got one. They got one away from AEW, and it's an EVP. Even better. I said where he's headed. Notice I said where he's headed, not they. Because according to Sports Illustrated, it doesn't look like Brandi is coming with him. Whether that's her choice or they just don't want her, I don't know. But that's another aspect of this that makes this so surprising to me. Cody had it made in AEW. He could have been a lifer in that company. And he had his wife with him. They just had a baby. They could all travel together on his bus. And now if Brandi doesn't come with him, he's back on the road away from his family like everybody else. I mean, he had to feel really slighted by Tony Khan for it to get to this point. This just feels personal. That he would actually walk away and go back to the place that never viewed him as anything more than a mid-carder. He desperately wanted to drop the Stardust gimmick. Vince McMahon said no, he would not let him. Cody said, I've run this into the ground. I'm done with this. I want to do more. Vince McMahon did not look at him as anything more than a glorified mid-carder. Doesn't matter what his last name was. That is how he was viewed. They did not give a shit about Cody Rhodes. And he's going to drop everything to go back there? It was only a matter of time before the pendulum swung in the other direction and WWE grabbed one of AEW's big names. It could only go one way for so long. This was inevitable. But the fact that it's one of the EVPs, that is a huge coup for Vince McMahon if it happens. Yeah, I mentioned earlier Brock Lesnar on the Pat McAfee show. And I'll bring it up again here. One of the things that Brock talked about was falling out with Vince McMahon in 2004. Going out and doing other things. He ended up in the UFC. He became the UFC champion. He became a legit pay-per-view draw. He became a much bigger star outside of WWE than he ever was in the company. So when he went back, he was a legitimate name. He had the leverage to negotiate the kind of deal that he did, leverage that he never had the first time around. He went out and proved that he could be an attraction somewhere else, and he ended up with a much better deal out of it. That could be part of Cody's thinking here as well. You know, he left WWE with no leverage, doing a shitty mid-card gimmick. He went out, he found success elsewhere, and was a major part of a company that now has 3 hours of television every week on TNT and TBS. He's a bigger name now than he was before. I mean, he's no Brock Lesnar. Cody Rhodes will never be Brock Lesnar. But he is coming back a bigger star than he was when he left. The question is, what kind of leverage does that give him? What kind of deal can he get for himself? Because Cody Rhodes can go back to WWE and he could be featured at the top of the card for the first few months. Could have a nice little honeymoon period. And then, a few months later, he could end up right back in the spot that he was in before, wrestling The Miz and Madcap Moss on television every week. That is the risk that he is taking. You know, there are examples of people leaving or getting fired by WWE and then reinventing themselves and coming back and getting a push. Drew McIntyre is an example of that. But there are lots of other examples of WWE being handed something and fumbling the ball. For every Drew McIntyre, there's 3 John Morrisons. And you see where he ended up after he came back. Cody has worked in that company before. He knows the risks involved. He is not going to be an executive vice president in WWE. He is not going to have a creative control clause in his contract in WWE. And I think any promoter who gives a creative control clause is stupid and shouldn't be promoting. All that does is cause headaches and problems. So he's not going to get any of that. He's not going to have the freedom that he talked about in that Ellis Island promo. But he is older now. He's got a kid. Your priorities change. Maybe that's a small part of it too. What I know is this. In 6 months from now, Cody Rhodes, let's say he's not happy with his position. He's having buyer's remorse on that new contract. If he signs a contract, again, it's not official. But if he does, he will have nobody to blame but himself. He's the one who went on Talk is Jericho a few years ago before he and the Bucks sold out the Sears Center in Chicago for All In, the show that started it all. He went on Talk is Jericho. he flat out said, "People ask me, would you ever go back to WWE?" And I tell them, I don't think so. Not because I don't like WWE or WrestleMania or I don't like money or the big production, but because I am literally now incapable of taking direction. If you told me you're going to write something for me, no. Out of respect for myself, it's my song to go out there and play. I guess he's no longer incapable of taking direction. I'll use this analogy since Cody set himself on fire a few months ago. If you're standing next to a pyromaniac and you're poking the guy in the ribs with a stick and he turns around and ends up lighting you on fire, don't blame the pyromaniac. You knew what he was capable of, and you're the one who decided to poke him with that stick. You kind of had it coming. I think Cody knows potentially the risks involved in what he is in for. In December, Cody said this about the crowd reactions to him on TV, which were really starting to sour. He said, "I have no complaints. I am thankful to the fans that cheer me, and I am thankful to the fans that boo me, because both sets of fans are getting ready to go on a ride that is just bizarre, and it's not the path that you think. We are not doing what has been done before." When the news first broke, I tweeted out that quote because it was the first thing that I thought of. I didn't know what to make of all of this. I thought maybe it is part of some kind of elaborate work that only he and Tony Khan are in on. Maybe he's trying to be Brian Pillman. But as more details have come out, no, I don't believe it is a work, because I'm still getting that question. Is it a work? Could it be a work? You know, anything's possible. Could it be a work? No. I don't believe it's a work. I believe the negotiations with AEW did not go the way that Cody had thought they would. And frankly, I don't see what's gained if this was a work by him leaving and going back to WWE, even if they do treat him well, and then he eventually goes back to AEW. Who exactly would they be working here? What is the work? Where is the work in that? Is what I'd like to know. It doesn't make sense to me. So no. To all those who still believe this is all for show, I know that quote that I just read would have you think maybe it is. It is a little fishy, but it is not. And it's too bad, because there was still plenty for Cody to do in AEW. They painted themselves into a corner with the stipulation that he can never again wrestle for the AEW World title after he lost to Chris Jericho 3 years ago, and he was adamant about not going back on his word every time he was asked about it. I'm not going to go back on my word. I'm not going to go back on my word. Another reason people think this may be a work, they figure, well, if he leaves and then in a year he comes back, I mean, WWE's not giving him a contract for a year. But, if he eventually comes back, that somehow invalidates the stipulation and he can wrestle for the title again. It's a wrestling storyline. If they wanted to change the stipulation tomorrow, they could have done it. They could do whatever they want. They don't have to let him go and spend the next 3 years of his career working for Vince McMahon to get there. It's people grasping at straws trying to desperately not be worked by AEW. All these people, they expend so much energy trying not to get worked. So what? If there's some kind of angle and you get worked, whether it's WWE or AEW and they got you, isn't that what wrestling's all about? In this case, I think it would be a stupid work because it doesn't make any sense. But all these people always expend all of this energy trying so hard not to be worked. It's like, who gives a shit? Isn't that part of what wrestling is? Why are you fighting so hard against it? What is the big deal if you get worked? Who gives a shit? But the Cody Rhodes heel turn, we never got the Cody heel turn. I think there could have been a lot of, if he just fully embraced it, I think that could have been fun. Brandi was on television a couple of weeks ago talking like a heel before Dan Lambert came out and absolutely roasted her. You know the audience doesn't like you when Dan Lambert gets cheered against you. For whatever reason, though, he was just so against the idea of going heel. He worked with Jericho, he worked with MJF, Brody Lee, Sammy Guevara, Malachi Black. He burned his flesh off against Andrade. He put Shaquille O'Neal through a table. He did all these things. But there was also matches we never got with Cody against Punk. Danielson, Omega, Moxley, Adam Cole, Hangman Page, Hook. New additions like Keith Lee. So there was plenty for him still to do. All this stuff that's coming out now about him and Brandi, the negative stuff, Wade Keller reported that Brandi was not well liked by a lot of the people backstage, and that caused people like Nyla Rose and Red Velvet and Vicky Guerrero to come to her defense on social media. I don't think it's Wade trying to smear anybody. He spent hours on the phone with people trying to get details on what the hell was going on here. I don't believe he just pulled that out of his ass. Now, is it a vocal minority that just didn't like her and they're spreading lies to try to smear her from within the company on her way out? That's possible. That's wrestling. Welcome to wrestling. Yes, that kind of stuff does happen. But it's also just as possible she rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Both of those things can be true. That there are people there who liked her and that she helped, and there are people who saw a very different side of her and are very happy to see her gone. That's the wrestling business. People will say nice things to your face and they'll talk shit about you when your back is turned. One thing I will not miss is Brandi on television in those awful segments with Lambert and American Top Team. They only did a few of them, thank God, but that last one they did a couple of weeks ago was absolutely dreadful. It was not entertaining, it was not fun, it didn't seem to serve any purpose other than finding something for Brandi to do. Lambert was already involved with the Lance Archer stuff anyway, so he was already getting TV time. There was no reason for any of it. I am not going to miss a second of it. But what a hell of a way for Brandi Rhodes to go out of AEW in her final segment being serenaded by chants of "shut the fuck up," and then being called all sorts of horrible things by Dan Lambert. She was out there looking like she was about to cry. But the fact that we won't have to suffer through any more of those segments, that's one positive to all this. Now with Cody gone, the rest of the roster should look at this, I think, as a chance to step up and take his spot. That's a big spot opening up. His absence opens up a huge opportunity for somebody else. And if I'm Vince McMahon and WWE, I'm pushing Cody to the moon. I'm treating him coming back like I'm rolling out the red carpet for this guy, like the prodigal son is returning home. Even if Vince McMahon still does not see Cody Rhodes that way, I don't think Vince McMahon is sitting around watching fucking Dynamite every week, looking at everything Cody has done since he's left. The first time he lays eyes on him, he'll probably look at him the same way he did 5 years ago. But if I'm Vince McMahon, even if he doesn't believe it, I treat Cody Rhodes like a very big deal. And I tweeted this out just hours after the news broke. I put this up on Twitter. I said they need to think strategically on this. If Cody goes back to WWE and he does well and he's treated right and he's booked strongly. Yes, I know he's a Rhodes and I know he was one of the EVPs. They're not going to book a lower card guy the same way. But if Cody goes back and is treated well, it shows the rest of the AEW roster and people like MJF and Wardlow when their contracts eventually come up. It shows the rest of that roster and all the young free agents that they're going to have. You know what? Maybe we do have a choice as far as where to go when my contract is up. Maybe things wouldn't be so bad if I went to WWE. Maybe the narrative that if I end up there, I'm going to have to change everything about myself and I'm going to be miserable and not be used in the way that I want to be used. Maybe that's not true. And then maybe things start swinging the other way with more people who might be unhappy with their position in AEW, giving WWE a look when their contracts come due. I don't even think Vince would care, but it would give them a way to stick it to AEW and throw a little dirt in their eye. WWE's never been above doing that. If Cody goes back and gets buried, or if he goes back and ends up as a bit player on the show, hey, we got this Stardust costume for you waiting over here, pal. That doesn't make them a very desirable option for anybody. Now, what do you do with Cody if he comes in? What do you do? If it's me, I save him as a surprise for WrestleMania. I debut him there in front of that big crowd. He doesn't even need to be in a match. They might want him in one because they have tickets to sell back-to-back nights in Dallas. I would have him working, though, ultimately, in the months ahead, I would have him working with all the top guys. I would have him work with Seth Rollins. I would have him work with Edge and AJ Styles and Randy Orton and play off their history. Orton was the vet, Cody was the student, and now the tables have turned. Cody says, look, I had the balls to do what you never did. I left. You never left WWE because you thought you were safe in the bubble. I left and I found success, and now I'm back. You know, you could build him for a match with Roman Reigns. I mean, they're paying him all this money if they sign him. It makes no sense to have him wasting time doing anything else. You know, if you sign Cody Rhodes to a big money contract and you put him in the ring with fucking Ricochet, I don't see what that really accomplishes. But on the AEW front, just to get away from this here for a second, there is something else unrelated to keep an eye out for. Discovery's merger with Warner Media just cleared an antitrust review a few weeks ago. And there was a report this week that the current Warner Media CEO, Jason Kilar, is all but gone in the next few months. He's going to be replaced by the CEO for Discovery. It's all but a done deal. Kevin Riley was the CEO of Warner Media who greenlit AEW Dynamite on TNT and gave them a shot. And it was big news when he left the company 2 years ago. AEW lost a very big supporter in him, and he was replaced by Kilar. Well, now Kilar is about to be replaced himself. AEW is probably fine, but if you're Tony Khan, you hate seeing that kind of turnover or instability because you have a new boss and a new team in place, and you never know for sure how those things are going to play out. You know, there was once a merger with AOL and Time Warner that I won't say killed WCW because WCW killed itself, but it wasn't a good thing. Different circumstances, you know, they owned WCW. Warner was tired of WCW losing money. A little bit different. Here it's a television deal that they have with AEW, but you know they're going to be looking for more money next year when they're negotiating for a new deal. So I'm sure it's something Tony Khan will be paying attention to. It was not a great week for the Dynamite numbers. The show did its lowest audience since the move last month to TBS, down 14% from the week prior, 869,000 viewers. Still third for the night on cable, and the numbers for this show do tend to ping-pong up and down, but it's disappointing to see things drop like that for what I thought was an excellent show, building to the Revolution pay-per-view. The Revolution card is looking stacked. Hangman Page against Adam Cole for the AEW World title is now official. Britt Baker defending the AEW Women's title against Thunder Rosa, now official. Somebody asked me on the stream yesterday about this. Does it feel like this thing really hasn't kicked into full gear yet? I agree. And there's still a few weeks to go, a couple of weeks, I guess not that long, until Revolution. Yeah, this thing really, it doesn't feel as hot as it should feel at this point, which has me thinking maybe you don't do the title change at Revolution. Maybe you can, kind of drag this out until Double or Nothing and do a title change there. It just doesn't feel like it should be at that, it's at the level that it should be at this point. I agree with that. CM Punk will face MJF in a dog collar match. Jon Moxley will probably be wrestling Bryan Danielson. Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus are going to defend their AEW tag team titles in a three-way match against the winners of 2 tag team battle royals they're doing on TV, which I think is overkill. All you need is 1. You don't need 2. I said it the other night. The last 2 teams represented in that 1 battle royal. You take those 2, and those are the 2 that go to Revolution. You don't need to do 2 separate battle royals. The ladder match for a future AEW TNT title match. Keith Lee is in, Wardlow is in, and now Powerhouse Hobbs, who beat Dante Martin on Rampage Friday, he's in. So they got some beef. They got some beef in that ladder match so far. And they're doing Sammy Guevara against Andrade El Idolo on Rampage this Friday for the TNT title after Andrade cost Darby Allin his title match against Sammy on Wednesday. I assume that the match is still happening. Sammy apparently suffered a scratched cornea in the match with Darby. I think he should be able to wrestle with that. Maybe he'll have to wear an eye patch, like Julia Hart's been wearing an eye patch. And Pac, and all these people that have been misted by Malachi Black. So, if it doesn't prevent him from working, then it will be Sammy Guevara defending the title against Andrade. I think Darby's going to return the favor, get involved. Hopefully we get a triple threat at Revolution for the title. But that's a hell of a lineup. But you know what happens when the ratings for Dynamite drop, right? You know what happens when that occurs. Tony Khan starts making promises. And Tony Khan starts promising something very big. And that is exactly what he did on Busted Open Radio on Friday. He promised a lot of news this week. He said he's working on something pretty big that, in his words, will be massive. He said it would be a big deal in pro wrestling. He gave no hint about what it might be. Meltzer did say that Khan was in meetings all day on Friday trying to put it together, whatever it is. It doesn't look like it's a talent acquisition. It's some kind of business deal maybe. But he's promising another big announcement. You know, at some point, you run out of big announcements.